Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the Cove, the home of the Australian profession of arms. This afternoon we're broadcasting to you live from Larrakia Barracks up in Darwin in the Northern Territory. As part of our ongoing NAIDOC Week celebrations, we're proud to be able to bring you a special CoveTalk today, which will be given by Warrant Officer Class 1 Ken Nelliman, who is the Regimental Sergeant Major of NORFORCE. Ken joined the Army in 1987 and was allocated to the Royal Australian Armoured Corps as a cavalryman. Since then, he's served in the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, the 2nd 14th Light Horse Regiment, Queensland Mounted Infantry, and also B Squadron, the 3rd 4th Cavalry Regiment, as well as holding a number of instructional postings, including at ARTC down in Kampuka and also at the School of Armour. Ken's also served as an observer trainer at the Combat Training Centre and with Defence Force recruiting. RSM NORFORCE is also a proud Torres Strait Islander, with his mother coming from Merah Island and his father from Badu Island. He'll be speaking to us today about the role of the RFSUs in Australia, about Indigenous service, and about how we, as an army, can more effectively connect with our Indigenous communities around Australia. Now, as usual, the speaker, Warrant Officer Nelliman, will speak for around about half an hour, 35 minutes, after which he will take questions from you, the audience from around Australia. Without further ado then, I would like to hand over to RSM NORFORCE to talk about his service and about engaging with Indigenous communities.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name, as introduced earlier, Warrant Officer Class 1 Ken Nelliman, the Regimental Sergeant Major of NORFORCE, which I've took up that appointment as of January this year. Firstly, to Lieutenant Colton and his team, thank you very much for the opportunity to use the Cove or this platform as a means to speak out, and hopefully the chance to be able to speak out and get my my message out to wider Army as well. Before I go on, I'll obviously speak a bit about considering that nationally we do celebrate NAIDOC Week, and our theme for obviously this year is Truth, Treaty, and Voice. I will talk about in some of those headlines as I go through this afternoon, but then essentially the discussion that I'll have is reference to Indigenous service over my last 32 years of service, and things that I've learnt along the way and things that we could probably improve on, we could look to improve on, especially when it comes to cultural competence within Army itself. I was born in Townsville. I grew up there. I joined the Army in 1987. I was always thought as a young child that I would actually be a soldier within obviously the Australian Army. I think this was always led by the fact that I remember as a young boy going down and watching Anzac Day marches down the Strand annually, seeing units and men march past, which always made me quite proud. And also stories that became relevant to us at a young age from my mother and father who would tell us stories about the Torres Straits, and also including that the fact that my grandfathers and great uncles who left their wives and families and sailed off to Thursday Island in the early 40s to join the Torres Strait Light Infantry Battalion. This gave me some pride and further inspiration to then make the decision that I wanted to be a soldier. If I go back along that as well, I've had some great times within Army as well, and a number of roles that had got me heavily involved, not just as a trooper through to a Warrant Officer Class 1 Regimental Sergeant Major, but also out of trade, speaking more aligned within the Indigenous space within actual Australian Army itself. For 3 years at Defence Force Recruiting, I was a team leader for the Specialist Recruiting Team Indigenous, where our mission given us by General Morrison was actually to raise the participation rate of Indigenous men and women in Army. leaving that job and then had taken up my last appointment, which was Regimental Sergeant Major of the Army Recruit Training Centre. I got to see that close hand. So not only actually just recruiting candidates into Army, but actually watching or observing that training. And I'm not just talking about non-Indigenous soldiers, but also non-Indigenous soldiers as well. In fact, the whole diverse range of people that would come through Kapooka over those last 2 years that I was actually there. So I think that I've got a fair bit of observation and a fair bit of knowledge about that, and I'm happy to obviously pass that on this afternoon. As noted, not only am I a soldier and have been obviously for quite some time, but I walk in two pathways. Is that I am a soldier within the Army, but I'm also a Torres Strait Islander and proud of that. My mother is from Merrick, as explained earlier, which is in the Eastern Island groups of the Torres Straits, and my father from Badu, which is in the Western Island groups of the Torres Straits. I was born myself in Townsville, but even though I walk in uniform and we all serve together and we all are green, there's a time when I leave that uniform and then go back and practice the cultures or take part in cultures of the Torres Strait Islanders as well. So it's extremely pleasing that way. Over the last couple of years, working within that Indigenous space, I was rewarded, which is quite unique, that I would actually be rewarded with an appointment here at the Northwest Mobile Force, or commonly regarded as NORFORCE. And I will touch a little bit about that and what's it like to work in a unit that falls under the Regional Force Surveillance Group itself. I did ask that question before, or I did wonder before, even after all this time of serving, I always wondered, as an organisation, a diverse organisation, are we culturally competent? There are things that I've seen along the way that I sort of think that we could probably do a whole lot better. And considering that we are now a more diverse organisation, I think there's things that we can actually improve on as well. In 1998-99, I was a corporal, posted to 1 RTB as a recruit instructor. I specifically remember that a bus of recruits or new recruits rolled up, dropping off the bus, and one of those recruits was actually wearing a turban. Pretty unique. I don't know if it had ever been done before, but as a corporal and with all the other staff and corporals, there was a look of shock. There was obviously some derogatory comments being made as well. And within that, I thought, why? If this bloke had obviously thought hard enough that he loved this country to sign a contract to serve his nation, then why should we be like that? Why don't we accept him, even though he comes from another culture or another a race, etc.? He was there to be a soldier and to serve. I remember seeing the day that he actually did march out. His turban was obviously dyed, so it looked almost like the slouch hat, the colour of the slouch hat. Had his corps badge and the rising sun on, and so proud to march out in front of his family. And I think good on him. Well done for doing so. I also think damn those people who didn't give him a chance or to help or believe the fact that that soldier had a warrior culture behind him, and he just wanted to serve the army. In my last 2 years at Kapooka, to see a person wearing a man wearing obviously a turban, or females wearing hijabs, I think that's great. And we're now showing ourselves that as an organisation, from when I started back in 1987, become more diverse, and therefore we actually recruit and we hone in and grab the skills of so many other different people. And I think that's a great thing for Army. A great thing for this organisation to stand above other organisations, be it civilian or the other two services as well. Accepting a posting here at NORFORCE, I was somewhat daunted. I didn't know what to expect. I was here 2 years ago here in Darwin, and 10 years ago, and for the 3 year I posted over here, I spent most of my time at Robertson Barracks, never saw this beautiful part of town. I had no idea what NORFORCE did, and I certainly had no idea what the other three units within the RFSUs, i.e. 51, Far North Queensland Regiment or Pilbara, did. And I consider myself quite lucky being a soldier or an armoured corps soldier, given that exposure or getting that exposure whilst I'm here. Working with the NORFORCE is unique. It is unique in the part that of the actual role of the unit, which we don't really see as normal ARA unless you're actually posted here. The task, the operations, the training is so widely open, but and it should be. But however, it's more specific to this organisation or to the organisation of NORFORCE. And that's a great thing. I was taken back at the first major activity that we did at the start of the year, where young Australian teenagers and adults, instead of being on a Friday night in town or doing something else, were here preparing and conducting their battle prep before actually jumping on Zodiacs and watercrafts to go out and place in OPs around the outskirts of the Darwin Harbour on a Friday night. And it motivated me highly. My last 2 years at Kapooka, I was so highly motivated by the fact that you see soldiers jumping off a bus either on a Tuesday or a Friday afternoon and marching out on a Friday morning or a Friday afternoon, whether they were there for the 3 months doing the reserve course or had suffered injury and been detoured along the way. But it was great to see those soldiers actually march out. That's my motivation, and I still am highly motivated by the soldiers and the role that this unit plays for our country, in a bigger sense. I've found that working within NORFORCE, although a small team as far as the full-time staff goes, that meeting the reserve side of the house is something I've never actually been in a reserve unit before, but it is quite a different role, but it's a good role. I absolutely enjoy what I do here as the Regimental Sergeant Major here at NORFORCE, and I'd probably find the same sort of difference if I was either in Cairns or Pilbara, even though NORFORCE is probably better. I've learnt a lot from the soldiers. I've learnt a lot from the reserve side of the house, and I've certainly learnt a lot from the ARA side of the house. I think that when it comes to cultural competence, that we have quite I suppose, a consistent turn-up of individuals willing to go out and play, willing to go out and serve during patrols, or whether that might be operations, etc., that we do under the Regional Force Surveillance Group. I have a sense that there is an enjoyment of actually parading. There is an enjoyment of actually being here. And I think it's, when you look at the percentage or the diverse range of Australians that we have here as a workforce within NORFORCE, I think it's because there is a sense of cultural competence here. This week we celebrated NAIDOC week, and we had a number of events attending, and even as far as back as Reconciliation Week, that as a unit that we did those sort of activities. It demonstrated that we are accepted of all cultures that come under the banner of NORFORCE. And I strongly encourage that those things that we do along the lines is picked up and certainly learnt by other units as well, to therefore develop a workforce that is happy to turn up all the time, happy to commit themselves to the hard work, happy to serve under that unit's banner, and therefore bring out and reach objectives along the way. We do have a number of things that we've done throughout our time here, or throughout our time here at at NORFORCE. Where, as I mentioned before, soldiers are quite happy to parade and or quite happy to turn up on a daily basis and serve here within this unit. It's totally different, obviously, coming, as I mentioned, as a armoured corps soldier, but one that I would always take on board, and I would certainly, if I had my chance again, I'd certainly be back for another rotation as well. I think that I'll just about close off there, and I would probably encourage if there are any questions, sir.
Thank you very much, RSM. I want to pick up on one of your themes there, if I can, to begin with, before we open the floor. And that's the dedication you've seen from a lot of the members of the reserves, and particularly those from Indigenous communities for whom full-time service may not suit, but they still want to serve their nation in the army. With the introduction of different circuits, do you think that there is an ability potentially for units to reach out to Indigenous communities in their locations? Potentially, Army can look at offering some of those circuit positions within regular units to Indigenous soldiers as part-time positions?
Well, historically, I think historically being that what I have learnt through discussions over my time here, and I speak especially with the unit of NORFORCE, the want to serve and the belonging or the sense of commitment has been around for quite a long time. NORFORCE has a history that dates a fair way back, and when Indigenous soldiers have served alongside non-Indigenous soldiers as well. We rely heavily, or it was relied upon heavily due to skills that were attained from the local Indigenous community that are actually up this way, knowledge of the land, being able to find things or find people. But since the the Nakaroo days, leading into even throughout East Arnhem Land, where the raising of the Northern Territory Special Reconnaissance Unit. So that lineage from back there all the way through has always been that NORFORCE has been a part of the territory. When you go out to communities and people dress up in cans, well, they're not actually part of, in their mind or in their thoughts, they're not Army, they're actually NORFORCE. Yeah. So that instant development from their the soldiers' grandparents, parents, uncles, etc., came from the fact that they served way back, and it's been a lineage throughout time, and they still do serve.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously, particularly within NORFORCE, people are returning to their communities wearing the uniform of the army. They're from the community.
Yes,
but you also have people who are posted in from the wider army who have never served, potentially in the Northern Territory at all, or within NORFORCE. What are some of the things that you as a unit, or you as the RSM, what's some of the advice you would give Australians for engaging with Indigenous communities up here, if they've had no experience previously?
Well, I suppose one of the major advice, if we had an outside unit who came to the territory or up north in 51 Far North Queensland area or across the actual Pilbara itself, would be to engage units such as NORFORCE Pilbara 51 before moving into the communities, because they're a part of that community itself. To engage the units, to engage the actual community itself, and just be open-minded about it. Some people may go in there with judgment, automatic judgment because it's new, just to be open-minded about going in there and being able to talk to people openly and honestly.
And is there a large between, because the Northern Territory and NORFORCE's AO is an enormous AO. How do you prepare people for the differences in cultures throughout that AO? Because different peoples, different mobs will have different nuances, different cultures. How do you prepare people for that?
Well, I think that once I would certainly recommend that when you have a soldier who's never been to that, who was maybe escorted, or say a new soldier to NORFORCE that's never been out there, they will soon learn off the Indigenous soldiers that are actually with them as well, that walk them through that. It's hard to attain, but you can't really judge that until you've actually done that.
Yeah.
To be able to walk into a community and see that community through your own eyes, and then be able to talk and relate and liaise with that community.
So really learning through
doing. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay. I'm going to go to our wider audience. Major Lee Brown from Headquarters Combined Armed Training Centre says, with most Indigenous Australians having a strong connection to land and country, and Army life moving people around so much, is there anything you think that Army could do to make it easier or more attractive for Indigenous Australians to join without the fear of being moved around every year or 2 years away from their country?
I mean, there were a number of schemes that were actually placed into action by Defence Force recruiting and etc. Whether that was a recruit to area. I think that the fact that when you have mentoring or close mentoring by the recruiting team or the specialist recruiting team, Indigenous, that are located in the centres to for that Indigenous man or woman to know that, yeah, you are going to be moved around in a number of places. That's just part of service life, which is something that as a person from DFR, that's what we used to always place to. I think the other side is on the receiving side. So therefore, if I'm an Indigenous person who's from a very, very remote community, and all I know is that community, and then Indigenous or Aboriginal people have been walking in Australia for hundreds of thousands of years, and that when they used to come into another person's area or land, that they would do an acknowledgement or they would have a welcome to country. Now, for a young soldier that gets moved from, somewhere down out west New South Wales and turns up somewhere in Townsville or Darwin, etc., for commanders, probably need to know that it is uncomfortable, I suppose. It's not, although the travel is, somewhat of a new adventure. But if we took the time back and did the official Indigenous or welcome to country or acknowledgement of country, I think you'd find that a person who grew up with that all his life or his or her life and had that given, by Army or provided by Army, you'd probably find a happier soldier, considering that they've moved from one, heartland of Aboriginal land to another, and that they are welcomed into country that way. And I think that it would pay benefits and go a long way for the service of that soldier. And that's what that cultural competency is all about.
Yes, and that doesn't even need to be restricted to those Indigenous soldiers. If we're going to truly, through NAIDOC Week and with Voice and Truth and Treaty, if we're truly to engage as an army with the traditional keepers of the land, then actually most people post in once a year at the beginning of the year. There's no reason why units, for example, can't have a welcome to country at the beginning of every year, so that everyone who is posted in is welcomed onto the land of those Indigenous
absolutely, and we've seen that example. We've seen smoking ceremonies being conducted at either Army headquarters or Western Creek, where they did that and they welcomed them in at the start of the year. Soldiers no one's ever rotated around, or they are, but if you're coming out of a schoolhouse into a unit, then you probably could wait a couple of months until that actually happens. You can't get everyone all at one stage, but if you start at the start of the year and did those things, we do it for the US Marine Corps when they land here in Australia. Why can't we do it for ourselves? I mean, people would ask, why should we do that? I would ask, why can't we?
Yeah. To me, it's a simple matter of respect.
No, absolutely. It's the same as soldiers who are deploying overseas as part of force preparation. We would put our soldiers through some form of cultural awareness training, but we don't do that much here as Australians to ourselves or to our own soldiers.
Yes, we probably prepare our people for operating in overseas cultures more than we do for operating amongst cultures in Australia.
I believe so. And, you know, I believe so, and that is my opinion, yes. Most
And it could be a quick fix, really, couldn't it?
Absolutely, sir.
Excellent. I'm going to move on to another question from the audience, from Lance Corporal Jones, who's at Headquarters Forces Command. First Nations peoples the world over have a rich history of images and symbols that represent their customs and traditions. Other armies, for example the New Zealand Army, have incorporated First Nations symbols into their accoutrements and parade sequences. How could the Australian Army adopt similar ideas to increase its connection with its First Nation peoples in a meaningful, respectful and open way?
Accoutrements are quite, in any tribe or any clan, accoutrements and weapons and things like that are actually quite important for the status or the establishment of that actual particular tribe in any Indigenous culture. If I think the way I believe that the way the New Zealand Army does it is very well. You know, even right as far as their sashes, their mates with their houses, etc. And I think it's, you know, it wouldn't serve. It would be beneficial. In fact, it would be an advantage if Australia took those on, or those sort of ideas on as well. I also am part of the Australian Indigenous Culture Advisory, the Army Indigenous Culture Advisory Board. There's some things that we've also discussed along the way. I'm very keen, and if it was to start here with the 51 Far North Queensland Regiment here in NORFORCE in particular, and also the Pilbara, if we were to engage and do something like that for Army, and then we could actually introduce that and bring those on. So if that meant that if I was to parade the colours of the unit and I was to use things like spears as well as EF-88s, that's pretty powerful. That would send a powerful message, and especially here in Darwin, here at the Territory, at the top end. And I think that'd be a great thing to actually see introduced, see utilised on certain occasions. Even to the fact that I would even go as far as investigating on using or investing into having my pay stick painted in Aboriginal art form. You know, whether that for NORFORCE here in with the local. I suppose the local people, be it either the Larrakia or a number of different sort of groups who make up our unit. But that'd be a very powerful thing, and I think that they're the sort of things that we start looking at as well.
Excellent, because if I'm right, some of the RFSUs or the RFSG have actually been presented with ceremonial spears from the people of the land on which they operate daily. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes,
and
yeah, they have been from the local people where the units sit upon, and they have been gifted to those units. Yes.
Well, that seems to me a very common sense and very powerful way. Mm-hmm. If the two most important things on that parade was a battalion's colours and the spear to protect them given by the people of the land on which that unit was based, that would be a fantastic coming together of two cultures within Australia.
It would be, sir. It'd be, you know, I'd be more than privileged to see that happen here in NORFORCE, and had that. So therefore, Army-wide, wider known through policy, ceremonial, etc. That'd actually be in there, that we could inject that.
Fantastic. Can I pick up on a point you had before I go? I know there's a couple of questions here in the audience, but you mentioned that you were on the Army's Advisory Council. Are you in a position for the wider audience to just explain the role of that council and how the council inputs into Army's decision makers, its higher commanders?
So essentially, the council is made up of a group of Indigenous servicemen, a different class of ranks, or various ranks, full-time, part-time, um, APS in some regards, and also chaired or staffed by members of Army headquarters through a DG Purse as well. We will sit twice a year. There'll be things that are posed to the board that as a board, that we might scrutinise, agree with, try to tweak a few things so it would be acceptable. Also, it would fit Army's role. For instance, the introduction of spears to be used. Those sorts of things, and a number of different things that get raised up for the council to discuss, and then placed forward for the chair to discuss with the Chief of Army on what his thoughts are as well. So we do that twice a year on a number of different sort of key points that we do. They're normally advertised as well, so if someone leaves the board, they will actually advertise it for young Indigenous men and women, rank dependent as well, to actually come along and maybe interested in joining that board. So they do that as well.
It's good to get a range of voices.
A range of voices, yeah. Yep. Excellent. Absolutely. Sure.
Next question comes from Captain Ryan in Army headquarters. Obviously, throughout a lot of Australia, there are connections with local Aboriginal groups, and that's the contact with First Peoples that most Australians have. As a Torres Strait Islander, are you able to, for the wider audience, give a bit of a background to some of the differences between culture in the Torres Strait Islands that maybe a lot of mainland Australians aren't aware of?
First and foremost, I think they're two very, very separate races. Some cultures, are pretty closely linked, not quite the same, and otherwise there's different things that you would actually mark throughout your time, from childhood to manhood, that are different from a Torres Strait Islander side to an Aboriginal person's side as well. Torres Strait Islanders are seagoing people who come from a long line, and actually a Melanesian type Melanesian people, and seagoing because their survival is more on the sea itself. Aboriginal people, coastline or nomadic, inland, as we all know. The cultural side of the cultural differences, there's a lot of things that Torres Strait Islanders will do that Aboriginals won't do, vice versa. But a lot of it is dependent on either their culture or their protocols or customs rely heavily seasonal, if you like. And seasonal, not only seasonal, but the life of a person, a man or a woman, of the different stages of growth within those organisations. So it's pretty broad, I suppose, question, but there is a significant difference between the two. Initiations for Aboriginal boys to coming into manhood, as a Torres Strait Islander, I really couldn't comment on that. I mean, there's so many different Aboriginal tribes that's done differently. Torres Strait Islands, for instance, it's the facial hair that grows or is permitted to continue to grow until deemed by great uncles and etc. that you're ready now to tie and shave, and that is your initiation. Not just shave, but be taken away, on a camp or off to a separate island where you learn to, I suppose, find your skills in survival, hunting, etc. for a week or so, and then come back, and so that therefore you're able to provide, and then you come back and in front of your great uncles or your uncles, etc., chosen, that you then carry out the actual shaving part, which is initiation into the manhood. So two very, very different cultures.
Absolutely. I suppose coming out of that, no matter where you are posted or stationed around Australia, it would be good for anyone to reach out to their local communities and understand more about their communities. to build up their knowledge of where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, probably more easy for myself being Indigenous or being a Torres Strait Islander, that I would try to go and sort and find out who the local traditional elders are, or the traditional owners, I should say. Even like, for instance, tomorrow when Darwin runs or holds its national NAIDOC march through town, that, you know, I would leave the office. I intend to actually attend that. I intend to attend that in uniform, because, you know, well, certainly because I'm from NORFORCE, for one thing, and, you know, Darwin people know who NORFORCE are. But it's not a rally, it's not a protest. It's actually a bunch of people from all walks of life, all different professions, coming together and showing some form or some pathway of reconciliation and celebrating something nationally together.
Excellent. The next question, RSM, comes from Lieutenant Darren Smith from Headquarters RFSG. Do all First Nations people need to meet all of Army's entry standards to serve? And if not, how does the group and NORFORCE support pathways to opportunity?
The group, so we all know about the different entries of pathways into defence, and certainly into general enlistment, whether it's a trade or whether it's or just a general enlistment job. You know, you always have that year 10. Here at NORFORCE, we have soldiers who don't have that year 10, but that doesn't stop them from actually achieving or being able to serve as a rifleman or patrolman within the RFSUs or under the RFSG as well. They do not have to have that education standard, but we also do have programs to help build that standard as well, or to build that education level up, so therefore they were able to use basic mathematics, etc., to be able to perform a number of tasks, i.e. navigation, things like that we require them as patrolmen. Uniquely here at NORFORCE and across the other two is that although they use the entry through Defence Force recruiting, majority of the time it's our people who are actually out on community engagement patrols or basically reconnaissance patrols, etc. Community engaging wise and recruiting those actual those people who are interested to join NORFORCE. Most wouldn't, you know, a lot of the population up here would not have an education, which is fine. Uniquely, we would find, locate, recruit, and we would train our own soldiers to be able to perform the tasks of the actual patrolmen that we require them to actually, or those tasks that we require them to actually do. They don't have to, well, it's sort of requirement to have the education. Otherwise, if they had the year 10, then they would go through the general entry or through the PRTC at Kapooka, through the reserve program. Whereas if not, then we would actually do that recruiting and do that training in-house to ensure they're able to do the task.
Excellent. We're sadly coming towards the end of our time here, as sounded not only by the Westminster chiming clock, which is a nice mixture of cultures here up at NORFORCE, but also the digger, which seems to be knocking down half the officers' mess outside. I want to ask you, though, you're coming towards the back end of your career, joining in 1987. In fact, many of the soldiers watching this may not have been born in 1987 when you joined. Can you talk me through some of the real improvements you've seen of how Army incorporates Indigenous peoples into the Army? What are some of the real success stories in your experience?
Well, if I go back to the recruiting side, having an Indigenous person at the door at recruiting, a lot of Indigenous people are probably too shamed, who probably don't want to talk to the non-Indigenous person about recruiting. So having that Indigenous person in the recruiting office at the first point of contact of engagement. So that's a you know, that's one of the, I suppose, the changes for the better. Our cultural competence as far as the inclusiveness of having an army elder as well, for Indigenous soldiers to look up to, and someone from not just soldiers, but you know, out of the other tri services and certainly other countries as well. A voice to the table towards the, which comes in towards, I suppose, the CASAC in reference to the Army Indigenous Cultural Advisory Board. And I think that even just with that slight improvement or that slight rise of participation has sort of educated or got the word out further that there are more people of different races or different diversities coming in to join our army. 1987, I was the only Indigenous bloke in my platoon. The next time I saw an Aboriginal bloke he was a corporal at the School of Armour. I was shocked. I didn't realise that they gave out, there was an Aboriginal guy who was a corporal. Absolutely shocked with that. But now that over my time as being an instructor there, and certainly in the last couple has been the RSM at Army Recruit Training Centre, the numbers of of recruits that are going through that are Indigenous, but not just that, but the amount of males I'll see running around with wearing turbans, and last year we started off seeing females come through with hijabs, and just to see that Army has certainly shown its I suppose that change by the different people that come through and join Army. It's like that old analogy, we're not cutting in the same forest anymore, we've now moved on to another side, and we've moved on to find a range of different people that which gives us a broader brand of professional skills that we could use. And I think that's, and that change is probably within the last 10 or so years. So.
Yeah, okay. And there's the Westminster chime again, reminding us of our blending of cultures. I suppose the flip side of that coin, and the Chief of Army's been very clear, we're an army in motion, we're always looking to improve, we're always developing, we always have done, we always are. You've described how we have developed so far in those big changes. On the other side of that coin, if there was one thing that you would really like to see continue to be improved or changed, what would that be?
That's a very good question. I'd probably
take it on notice.
Yeah,
take it on notice. And what we might do is we might put that online, we might put it underneath, so you can give a written answer about
Sure.
where you think we could go next.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. I would like to thank Warrant Officer Class 1 Nelliman for giving his very own, very personal views during this NAIDOC week on engaging with Indigenous communities, the role of the RFSUs, and his personal views on Indigenous soldiering. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Next month in August, we'll be bringing you the co-chair, Dr. Morris, who will be coming out from Stanford University, and we'll be broadcasting that in August, and we'll put the details of that on the website and promulgate that soon. But from all of us here at the Cove, the home of the profession of arms, up here in Larrakia Barracks, Northern Territory, thank you for joining us.